What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Inside Lines podcast. I'm your host, Atoya Burleson.
And I am Avril.
Coming up a bit later in the show, we'll be chatting with licensed psychotherapist Shadeen Francis about all things sex.
Uh-oh.
We'll also be getting into our hot take this week, where we'll discuss the sexual assault accusation against NFL quarterback Deshawn Watson. But first, Tia, how was your weekend?
Listen, I had a busy weekend. We decided to take a group that we mentored through our foundation to Memphis. Now, this was a test run, right? So it's 8 kids, 8 boys, 12 and 13 years old. Took them to Memphis to do some kind of like historical sightseeing. We took them to Phillips Ashley, which is a luxury Black-owned chocolate factory.
Okay.
Just giving them experiences, right? Because ultimately what I want to do is take them on like Black college tours or,
Right.
just like really do it. When I say those kids worked me this weekend, man, they worked me. And it's different too, because you know how you can be with your kids when like your kids act up, you can quickly give them a look or
yes,
or maybe
them.
You snap for a second. Exactly. These kids don't spend a lot of time with me. They spend a lot of time with Cliff. So I was like, ease your way into it. By day 2, I know they was like, look, Mom, we don't like her.
She is on us. Well, first of all, you said 12 and 13-year-olds. That's serious. That's that's the adolescence age, middle school. They are busybodies and a lot be going on.
Yeah. But so part of me was like, okay, well, they're 12 and 13. They got a little more sense, right? So we can take them to the museum. They going to read. They going to do this tour, whatever. But I will say, overall, they're good. They're great boys. They gave me a few challenges, but we worked through it. We made it home. The only part I was like, okay, what did you get yourself into is we had a layover in Dallas, going and coming back, right? And on the way back, like all the adults, everybody, we all traveled together, of course. On the way there. On the way back from Dallas to Seattle, I was by myself with all 8 boys plus Xander, my youngest kid. Yeah, by time.
Whew, child, let us pray. I know exactly what you be going through in my teenage chronicles. It's real. It's a lot.
And, it's boys are different. Like I grew up with all girls, so I can handle and navigate certain situations, certain conversations. But boys are also like, do I want to drop my nuts here or not? You know what I mean? So you kind of got to figure out, how to navigate it. But it was good. Flight delays on the way there, on the way back, the whole 9, but we made it back. And what about you? Because we had similar travel stories.
Girl, yes. It's funny because the stage you're in, I remember being in, like, as far as like traveling with the boys, taking them different places, whether it was for AAU bar, whatever the case may be. So I feel your pain. Let's just say I feel your pain. I traveled this weekend, but it wasn't with the kids. I actually had to go to a funeral this weekend, but it's a little disappointing, and really disappointing for 2 reasons. One, of course, it was a close cousin of mine that passed away, and also it's Nate's birthday. So like all his birthday plans got canceled too. So it wasn't, it wasn't a weekend that either of us really wanted because, both is hard, but hopefully I'll get a redo and we can celebrate him another time. So
and then travel delays on the way back.
Yeah, girl, 2 hours we sat on the tarmac. I was like, okay, Lord, I'm really, my patience is like, I wanted to pull my hair out. I was right towards the end and he finally came on and said, we take it off. I was like, ooh, you had about 2 minutes left in me and I was going to lose it.
And that's good though, because I'm surprised that the crew didn't time out.
Yeah, I think they were about to. That's why they finally took off. And it was so funny because I was like, she's like, do you want anything to drink? I'm like, I just want water. By the end of that 2 hours, I was like, can I just please have a mimosa, some champagne? She's like, you know what? We ran all out. I was like, let me just try to go to sleep or something because it is just not my day.
Listen, she said those 2 hours wore everybody out.
Like, man, we are out. I am sorry. I'm like, I get it. Let me just go ahead and try to go to sleep, which I couldn't. But, I made it home. I'm good. It's all good. So that was my crazy weekend.
Well, good. I'm glad y'all made it back.
Me too. All right, enough about that. Let's get into this week's hot takes. right, it's time for this week's Hot Takes, Tia. What we got?
This week in Hot Takes, we are talking Deshawn Watson. Lord have mercy. And if you have been under a rock and just have heard nothing, Deshawn was accused of sexual harassment in 2021, March of 2021. And since then, roughly 24 massage therapists have came out and said he has done some form of inappropriate behavior. Of course, he sat out last year, but that was more so contract issues because he requested a trade from the Texans. But we're approaching this year. He's with Cleveland, got this max contract situation, but he hasn't received his punishment for this behavior, right? So if you all don't know, it is a clause in the CBA that has things about conduct or player misconduct, right? And this falls in that category. And so, of course, everybody off, NFL fans and things of that nature, they're like, so what's going to happen to him? Like, what is going to be the punishment? Like, he can't just get away from this. Originally, he was sentenced to, I said sentence, but they handed down a 6-game suspension.
Yes.
And no fine. And of course, NFL appealed it. And last week, the results and final decisions from that appeal came out. And Deshaun is suspended for 11 games and he has an $8 million fine. And he also has a contingency that he can't return until he goes through some sort of counseling or therapy sessions and execute whatever the treatment plan is that they have for him. Yet and still, people are saying that this suspension is too light. Atoya, what do you think? You think this situation, like the results of this appeal, is too light?
I do not. I think it's fair. I think we need to move on. I think I don't think anyone's going to all agree. That's just real talk. No, not everybody's going to agree. But what people are missing here, for me personally, what the bigger issue is he getting help? It doesn't matter if it's 6 games. It doesn't matter if it's 11 games. As long as he's taking the time to sit with someone and work through these issues and talk with someone where he comes out of this a better human being, ultimately, that's what I care about. So I think that first of all, I thought the 6 games was okay. I thought that they would make him go through therapy longer, for the entire season. I think that would have been fair because the punishment is not what we're about. At least me. I want people to become better humans. And he can still become a better human, you know what I'm saying, just by going and sitting and talking to people, figuring out why he did what he did, where it stems from, understanding why it's not okay. All of those things really need to be brought out. And so I care about the inner person more than a certain amount of games. What about you, Tia?
Fair. So I agree. And I think the biggest thing or biggest opportunity that came out of this is more so a clarification on what exactly is player misconduct and what are the consequences for player misconduct? Is this a first time offense? Is this a second time offense? Being able to clearly define okay, first offense is this many games, second offense is that many games, whatever. I think it's an opportunity for the NFL and the NFLPA to better clarify that, because to your point, I actually agree with the original suspension handed down by Judge Sue Robinson when she said, based off of what you all have given me, based off of this agreement that y'all have provided me, as well as prior situations and things with other players, 6 games is what I can give him. I would want to give him more, but 6 games I can give. And so I think the 6 games was fair. 11 games, whatever, is fair. To your point, nobody is going to ever be like, oh, a year was enough.
Right. Okay, y'all, that's it for this week's Hot Takes. Coming up next, our chat with sex therapist Shadeen Francis. On the show today, we have someone we're very excited to talk to. She is a licensed psychotherapist, media personality, graduate professor, and author whose expertise spans the domains of sex therapy, emotional intelligence, and more. She's been featured on platforms like ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox, the New York Times, and Cosmopolitan, to name a few. Shadeen Francis, welcome to the show.
Hello, hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, so I want to start off by talking a little bit about football, just a smidge. I know you live in Pennsylvania, right?
Sure do.
And you went to school there.
I did. Graduate school, yeah.
Okay, so I have a question. Are you a Philly fan? Are you an Eagles fan? What's up?
I mean, okay, so I'm a transplant here. I'm actually from Toronto, so I would be remiss if. I mean, no, I can.
You can still
No,
be.
I'm a just. You have to go home. You have to go hometown. I think you gotta go.
Okay, but wait, how long have you been in Philly?
Oh, you're calling me out now. I'm approaching 9 years. My excuse though is that I just got cable like last year. So
okay, fair.
We're pretending that's why that I haven't been watching more sports. My partner is the sports person, and I joke with him like, "Oh, what episode of Sports Ball are you on tonight?" So I'm kind of the worst. He played college basketball, but like.
So you have to watch a little bit of sports. So it would be basketball if you really had to watch.
It would be, yeah.
That's fair.
That is hilarious. Okay.
So I am so fascinated that you're a sex therapist. I want to talk about how you decided, out of all careers, to stumble upon and just focus in on sex therapy.
So I'm a big dreamer. I think that our dreams and our desires are really significant. I'm also a nerd. So growing up, I was a nerd of the comic book variety, and my series of choice was X-Men. And so for a really long time, and actually truthfully still, I would love to be a member of the X-Men. I keep trying to figure out who is their PR person, whose email do I need to put my application into. But growing up, I was very serious about this until the 5th grade, when I realized oh shit, I might be a normie. I was just waiting for my mutant powers to manifest for a very long time. And in the comics, you put yourself in physical trauma and your powers come up. So I was jumping off of things. I was doing all kinds of risky things, and all that was happening was that I was getting hurt. And I was like, what if? So, most people talk about, their later in life career change, or they might have their quarter life crisis in their early 20s. I got that over with when I was 11. I was like, oh shit, what if I'm not organized to do the things that I thought I was going to do with my life? So, and my people are Caribbean, so it was really important to me to have an answer for what I want to be when I grow up at every function, right? So, at that point, I was scrambling. So this is the summer before 7th grade.
You know what? I hate that question, though. When people are asking kids, what do you want to be when you grow up? It's how in the hell am I supposed to know? I'm be an attorney. That's what I'm going to be.
Right? My brother horrified everyone by telling them that he wanted to be a bus driver.
It was cool, right? You got to ride the bus.
He was like, I like the bus and I like kids. So that didn't go over well, and that question stopped coming up. But by that time, I was already well on my path. And so this is the summer before 7th grade. And my cousins and I used to, whenever we had sleepovers at one of my uncle's houses, we would stay up as late as we possibly could and watch everything we could find on television that we weren't allowed to watch at our own houses. So The Simpsons, Beavis and Butthead, all of that. So one night, I promise you I'm getting to the center. So we are scrolling one night and we come across this show. Some folks will know it. It was more popular in Canada than here, but it was called Talk Sex with Sue. Of course, we didn't see the actual title.
That is so funny.
Yeah. And so this is 2 a.m. I'm 11 or 12. And there's this little old lady waving around this big purple penis. And someone's okay, we're obviously watching this now because what's going on?
Right.
But what had happened at that point in time, so remember, I'm coming in with this passion or desire to be a part of the X-Men because I had felt a lot like a misfit and an outcast and wanted to be with a collective of people that I thought could change the world for the better. I'm watching this show late night. This woman is waving around this dildo, and she gets a call, and the person says, "I don't have a question. I just wanted to let you know that you saved my life." And so I was like, okay, boom, I'm going to do that. I'm like, whatever this is. I'm like, she's on TV. She's having a good time. She has a whole bunch of swag, right? I'm like, I have no idea what this is, but the intersection of like that heart place and those big dreams and hearing that this work had meaningful impact, I say only half jokingly, like if we had stumbled across like, I don't know, like a show about sandwiches, then I'd own a delicatessen at this point. But like just the juncture. And I am the sort of person that like once I decide on something, like I'm all in. And there's been no looking back since then. So I know folks are like, oh, like here's the pivotal. No, it just happened to be I was in a place where I was open and something spoke to me and I followed it.
Shout out to that though, because I think about, remember late night when stuff used to come on and you, like you said, you're always like, mom and dad are asleep. Let's see what's going on. See what's coming on the TV. And no one ever really talked about it. So you're like, I like this. I'm gonna actually talk about this. Everybody else is in the dark.
Yeah.
And I had no, keep in mind, I had no idea what this was. In hindsight, I'm like putting pieces together. I'm like, oh, this was an episode on anal. But like at the time, I had no idea. But it also, but that also meant a lot to me, right? To be 11 on the cusp of 12, my body is already changing things, right? I've already hit menstruation. I already have little boobies, right? And
so stuff is happening and
stuff is happening. I'm hearing things. I'm seeing things. Kids were blowing up condoms as balloons at school, right? Like the people were sexual, right? The youth are coming into themselves as sexual beings and nobody was talking about it except for the stigma and the taboo and the shame. But here is a person who's on television, who has a platform that's saving people's lives. And I'm a middle child. So the contrast of that was so compelling and juicy to me. I could not get away from that because I'm like, this is important and nobody's talking about it and what is in there. And I need to know.
Okay. So I think you just answered it, but now with your interest peaked, right? Were you able to start having the conversation like with your parents or adults around you, or were you still like, no?
No. Again, intersection, so Black woman. My parents are Caribbean, and I grew up in Pentecostal church, so not as far as Baptist church, but you know, all the songs are about my heart is for the Lord, and therefore my body that way will go, right? So you know, there wasn't a lot of spaciousness. You know, my dad used to say, only half jokingly, you can date after you're married, right? Like,
yeah,
you know, like two
half jokingly,
half jokingly, right?
Yep.
You get married and then you date that person.
Yep.
Right? That's your dating, right? And so there wasn't a sense that there was room for me to explore. And so my curiosity still existed largely in private, but being a person then who was open to having the conversation in a way that I didn't feel personal shame around, like it felt still very clear to me, like, oh, that's other people's stuff. That also meant that somehow I was the person that people were coming to, not necessarily for the answers, because I think growing up, and I don't know if this was true for your experience as well, I think growing up, I think we were all pretty clear, like none of us knew what we were, we were all very clear we didn't know, and we kept looking for someone who did, but we were all clear like it was none of us. But we were just trading the best of what we were able to pick up along the way.
You know, it's interesting because my friends growing up, like through high school and stuff, everybody was sexually active but me, right? Mm-hmm. And then I went to college, like still a virgin. Now that didn't last long, but that's neither here nor there. But I literally was in college and did not know that women were supposed to have an orgasm too.
Yeah.
Like I thought,
yes.
And that's how like clueless I was. 'Cause I didn't look up sex. Like I was not that kid, and I don't even know why. Like everybody around me was having sex, but I wasn't. But I didn't go and search out like, so what did y'all do? How did it feel? But I felt dumb as all get out when I was like, oh wait, I'm supposed to get some too. Like
yeah,
I thought, you know.
But
I did.
Cheated,
I thought sex was over when he came, and that was it. You know what I mean? Like not that. I mean, I'm not gonna say it didn't feel good. Like it felt good. Like the act felt good, but I had never had an orgasm. I'm like, is this what it's supposed to? Right. Oh, okay, well, it do feel good, but you know.
But notice that's not about you or your personal ignorance, right? Notice that you learned so much about sex, but not that. Notice you learned so much about sex, but not your right to a pleasurable experience, right? That this is supposed to be a pleasurable experience. Like you're supposed to want it, but he gets all the pleasure, right? And so like that, there's a whole culture and system around that. And notice how much it leaves out for anybody who doesn't have a penis Right. And for anyone who isn't having sex with men, like, what are we even doing this for then? Like, what's the point? Because we ain't gonna have no babies. And if we're not supposed to orgasm in this, why would we, there's other things that we could do with our time other than roll around for a while.
Right. I remember my friend saying she thought, and I'll never forget this, we were in college, and she said she thought orgasms were you yelling while the male was penetrating you. And you just yell and you make these noises, and that is what an orgasm is. And I was just thinking in my mind, like, all of us just came in here. Our parents did us an injustice. We just clueless. Okay. We were all clueless. And so I love that you decided to do this and talk about it. Was this in college that you decided to talk about it? Or did you start in high school, like asking questions?
Yeah, I started early. There's a there's a series of like reels and content that's coming out that's really funny. The audio is someone like reading like this very graphic novel, like, oh, he put it in my booty hole like 7 of the time, right? But it's like a person, the title of the video is always like, oh, like what my parents thought I was reading versus what I was actually reading. And so it's just like really like hardcore raunchy stuff, but they like have like a picture of like Alice in Wonderland on the book. And so, right. And like that was kind of me, right? Like some of my early exploration was just reading more sexual content. And I can remember being, in like the 8th grade reading like Zane, like, right, like some like mature content, And as I got into high school.
Pause, rewind though.
Yeah,
in Zane, did they talk about women having orgasms?
Oh, yeah.
I must have been not reading the right books, because I know I have read Zane books, and I swear to you, I did not know women were supposed to have orgasms.
It probably went over your head, though. Like, it's, you know what I mean? If you don't know what those things mean, kind of like to her point, when we were younger, we're watching this stuff as kids. We don't really know what we're watching or what's really going on.
Yeah, and I mean, the two that I had both centered around women who, I mean, it was very interesting portrayals, but, both organized around women who were like doing all of the initiating, like very powerful, like, this is what I want, I need this, I'm going to chase after it. I don't care that he's got, 5 baby mamas and lives with his wife, like, this is what I'm going to do it on the train, Sorry, Zane, this is not a critique of Zane, I'm just saying stuff.
That was some good stuff back there. No.
Right, and it was interesting to me and enlivening to me to like hear about women who unabashedly wanted pleasure and lived in worlds that organized around their desire. And so that was, I think, really impactful and meaningful to me, such that by the time I got to high school, when folks were including me in conversations or coming to me, it wasn't necessarily because I, had some reputation for being particularly sexual. I had a reputation for being open and a good listener, right? And so people could say things to me or just process their own things out loud. Like, I didn't have answers for people. I don't know what to tell you, right? But that I could hear them and hold space for them and reflect back to them what I heard about what they want. Right? Like, I don't know what you should do. And I was very clear, again, middle child. I know better than that shit. Like, I'm not, ain't nobody no advice from me. Even my clients are like, can you just tell me what to do one time? And I'm like, no. I'm like, I could, but that's not what you want. Because ultimately, I want you to connect with what you actually want. Right? And so that process started in high school for me, and reading less fiction and more about how things work and how things happen. And that got me really interested. Watching people do things that didn't add up got me on the path of therapy, right? So my early sort of exploration with Talk Sex with Sue Johansson. She's a sex educator. She was a nurse who became a sex educator, and she was a really cool person. She would give out like contraception and birth control. She was like this rogue, like nurse baddie, who was like vigilante educator, like giving women tools to say yes or no for the things that happen to and within their bodies. But I'd watch people, have these conversations and say these things that they want. And then, teenagers, yes, but like do things that I'm like, that doesn't seem like a good choice. And I couldn't understand why people were making these choices. And then I would get into relationships and I'd watch myself make these choices. And I'm like, sis, what is going on?
Yeah, that's so
like
true.
you barely like this boy. What is happening? Right. And so I ended up getting a neuroscience degree. It's a psychology, neuroscience, behavior degree, because I'm like, I need to understand what's happening on the inside. Right. And that was my route into doing this from a clinical lens, because I think we have all of these conversations about sex theoretically, and I think we're missing huge gaps and chunks of information. But then once we have information, it's still very important to me that then for us to figure out, okay, so what do we do? Because we can sit around and talk forever. Right? We can sit around and talk about it forever, but how do we actually implement these into our lives in a way that makes change?
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because I was thinking about, couples, right? So people can sit and have these conversations with you, but then you interject couples in there, right? And then couples do not know how to have these conversations. What's the number one reasons you feel like couples seek sex therapy? Is it the lack of communication? Is it, I don't like the sex? Like, what would you say is the number one reason?
Yeah, so therapy has the brand, therapy as a brand is shifting, but still more in the individual space, right? Folks tend to see individual therapy as an opportunity to take wherever I am now and reflect and move forward. So you're not waiting for like your life to be in shambles necessarily in order to go to therapy. Couples don't do that. We haven't figured out the couple branding quite yet. So couples come in usually when they are on the brink of demise, right? Couples either come in for premarital counseling, like let's just do a quick little brush up because our pastor said so, right? Or like it would just be like a nice little bonding thing for us to do since we're still in like the butterfly season of wedding planning. Or they come in because like this is falling apart and we're trying to see whether or not it can be saved. Yeah. Yeah. You come in, yeah, as you're deciding to get married, like, should we do this, big investment with each other? Are we equipped? Are there things that we need to be looking at that we didn't notice? And so that is very growth centered, but because it's organized around a moment, premarital couples are not necessarily interested in long-term work, right? It's often, and that's no judgment, but you're coming in as sort of like almost like a personality test, like you're not going to do anything deep to change it. You just want the data. Right. And then the other set of couples come in for any number of reasons. But the actual crux point, when I ask couples why now, it's because we're considering separating.
I feel like when people are getting ready to get married, they feel like, or they have this assumption in their head that once they get married, everything should go smoothly now. Like there won't be any bumps in the road, or not that there won't be any bumps in the road, but just like they don't think about the evolution of themselves individually, And so when issues do arise, to your point of people coming in when it's like it's a complete shit show on the brink of disaster, it's because they just did not, there's no way they could think about or even imagine that marriage would be as difficult as it is. So why would they maintain it beforehand,
Yeah, no, and that's a really significant point. And I think it's not dissimilar to the ways that we think about sex, right? That we have these really limited views of this like escalator model that misses the nuances of like how deeply we can feel during this process. And it's not just about these like highlight moments of like, we're swept up in this deep passion and they pin me against the wall. And that, right, like that montage, this like really romantic, moody montage that just like somehow skips ahead to like, we're just like laying together in bliss. And then that's the scene, right? We do that with marriage, right? Where we have these highlight moments of the courtship/dating period. And we have this beautiful ceremony and that could be the orgasm. And then you're just supposed to like lay together in your marital bed in just like bliss forever. Right. But we miss all of the details, all of the setup, all of the negotiation, all of the challenges, all of the awkward parts, all of the self-consciousness that still exists before, after, and during, and folks are often really surprised, at what it actually looks like because we got no information. We get this big, social reward, of this big event where people celebrate you and you have this status. It's fascinating to me. My husband and I have been together 11 years. We've been married for 3, so I took my time getting married. That wasn't him. That boy asked me real early, and I was like, yeah, we'll circle back. Right? He didn't do like a formal proposal, but we knew we're gonna walk. We ain't running. We got time. But it was fascinating to me to see how people treat us differently once we were married. Right. And it's a similar kind of thing that happens, when you, are in a sexual relationship with someone, right? That think about what it meant to lose your virginity and separate from the shame and the stigma attached to that. But there was for many people, there was kind of a social status, around I do this now, and there is something that is deeply validating about feeling desired and chosen. There is something that feels like security about some kind of, socially approved status. But you're still two people trying to figure out how to take your individual journeys and align them in a way that gives you both enough of what you need to feel good. And a big part of why we struggle to have sex lives that feel meaningful and deep and rewarding is because that's the same problem. We are still trying to figure out how to negotiate my own individual journey and needs and figure out how in this joint context can we both get enough of what we want and need in order to feel good.
Is that a lack of I know you talked about, and you do talk about a lot, emotional intelligence? Is there a lack of, not sitting and understanding how to, emotionally respond and or say to your significant other what you're looking for or, what you're not looking for? Do you think that that's missing? Is that a strong component that's often missing in relationships?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I'm totally biased because emotional intelligence is the lens through which I like to talk about it, right? And so emotional intelligence, at its simplest, is just our skill or our ability to understand and manage our emotions. And so when I say a word like manage, that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. What it unfortunately means, especially for Black women, management is often translated into or suppress or deny or breeze through, right? We do a lot of dialoguing intra-community wise about getting over things.
You know what it really is we already have people in our ear telling us as Black women you're too strong, you're too dominant, so to speak, right? And so when you get into a relationship, you bring that. And then as people are studying your ear, you're in there learn when to be quiet. You don't have to argue every point, or you don't have to provide an opinion about everything. So then when it comes to your sexual relationship with your partner, you're okay, well, if I say this, I'm going to hurt his feelings. Or if I say this is me nagging about the fact that I ain't had an orgasm in a month, or, whatever the case may be.
Yeah. Yeah. And, even in that, the thing that I like to invite us into noticing is even noticing the ways in which our sharing of emotions is an argument, right? Right? How is it for us that our experience of naming how we feel default has to be received as or expressed as anger? So I'll give you a great example because this happens in my office all the time. So I'm not even talking about anyone in particular because most folks do this. Okay. Yeah. So a couple comes in, we're unpacking what's going on, blah, blah, blah. And I might invite, one partner to, just deepen, we do all of this like bypassing of our feelings. We channel them and project them and all this stuff. So I'm like, say what you want. Right? Let's start there. I just want you to say what you want. Like, we will worry about the backlash later. Like, name it. And what will inevitably come out is something that sounds like, well, you never fucking take me anyplace. Right? Or when was the last time you blah, 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 blah. Right? Now, there's genuine feelings in that. There's tenderness in there. There's softness in there. There's hurt and disappointment in that. But what did you hear? Right? Like, what do people inevitably receive? And people assume that's women, but it's not gendered. It's not gendered. When you give a man the space to name his feelings, because we don't actually create context for any of us to get to be soft with each other, we are so afraid that softness is a weakness that is a liability. And so we do not allow ourselves to be vulnerable. We're all trying to have passionate, hot sex. Yeah. We're all trying to have whatever Megan's having, whatever Janae Aiko's having, but we don't see a way to get to there, largely because the obstacle in our path is like, you need vulnerability. You need to be able to be open and to risk being impacted. And so many of us have been harmed because so few people, even when we find our softness, we are often not around soft people. So we become hard in response to the hardness, and then we stamp out all of the tender. So instead of saying, I really miss when we just had quality time. We used to just like go to dinner and not be on our phones and just like laugh. So we never fucking go anywhere anyways because you're always on your phone. Because them bitches on your phone are more important than me, huh?
Yes, the delivery. And that's the emotional intelligence. That's like really learning how to communicate what you want. Not really making it, like when I heard you say that, it's like you're not making it about them. You just make it about like what you really want. Like, what are you looking for? And I think people do miss that. It just comes across so harsh. And I remember going through that phase post kids. Like once the kids came, it's less sex. And I always ask myself, is it that I don't want sex or am I just dang on tired? Right. And so like I had to really figure out what was going on with myself. And that's what I realized. Like, okay, I realized like by this time I'm tired. So like maybe an hour or two before that, if you're here, if you could do X, Y, and Z, I won't be as tired. And then we can just have some fun. Right. And so just instead of, when I have time to, can I just go to sleep? You don't have to get up in the middle of the night. You know what I mean? And so when you're talking about processing that, it is like I had to learn that too. It's about, meaning what you say and saying what you mean to where that person's able to like truly understand where you're coming from. Because if it was our friends or someone else, we'd say it differently. But then with our spouse, it comes out in this derogatory manner. So I remember that post kids. And once I figured that out, that changed the game for me. Because at first I was like, listen here, I'm tired, okay?
It's so transformative. And I invite people into this all the time. Find the feelings and name them. And notice if all you can ever name are angry feelings. Right? And that doesn't mean that you're only angry. Angry is a protective feeling. Doesn't mean it's not valid. Anger lets you know that I have an unmet need or a boundary is being crossed. So it's important information, but anger shows up first because it is designed to be protective and it's motivating you to advocate for yourself. So that is important. And I don't want us to lose that, even though the social brand is off.
Oh, I like that. I need to communicate that to my kids. Because, I mean, you know how we grow up like anger is a bad thing, like you shouldn't be whatever angry. And I'm like, no, it's okay for you to be angry. But just the way you just worded that, like, let me bookmark that right now.
Yeah, all anger is letting you know is that I have an unmet need or a boundary is being crossed. But we have a culture that says that from there you get free license to then do or say whatever. And that's where I got to check people all the time, right? Like anger is not the same as aggression. So I can be angry with you and not swing on you. I can be angry, right? Like, but we permit it. Like if a kid says like, oh, what, if you ask them, why did you hit them? Like, oh, I was angry. And we're like, oh, okay, well, we don't hit, right? Like those two actually aren't linked, but it's a cultural phenomenon that we have associated violence with as a way of expressing or resolving our emotions. And so we need to interrupt that. But in that same vein, if we can't get through the threshold of anger, it is also information that we have some more vulnerability work to do. Because if anger is a protective emotion, on the other side of anger is always more softness. And so let the anger come out first. But then the next question that I ask people is, what are you sad about? Right? So you talk to me about what you're mad about. What are you sad about? Right? And then underneath sadness, if someone can hold your sadness well, inevitably what you start talking about is, what are you scared of? And that's where we go. And so when people are listening to me talk and they're like, this girl's a sex therapist? I thought we were going to talk about like whips and chains and all that Rihanna stuff that she, right, right, you know? And I'm like, yeah, but before we get to any of that, like I got to create a container in which you can actually experience things deeply. Like if you want to be having mind-blowing transformative sex, then you need to be able to feel. Mm-hmm. And so many of us are doing all the actions and they're like, yeah, I can, you know, I'm a size queen. I can blah, blah, blah. My legs go over here and I can 7 hours later. Right. But like none of that is the point. Right. It's not how, you know, how deep is your, how wet is your, how blah, blah, blah. Right. Like all of that. We can talk about that. But like how deeply can you feel? How good are you at feeling?
Yeah. Do you equate a lot of that to like sex? Like, I think about self-esteem. Does self-esteem play a part in women's sex life, you know, with their significant other, or even how they feel, you know, in the midst of sex?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, we also do our relationships a disservice by not acknowledging that this is also men.
Yeah.
Right? That this is also men and every gender in between, right? Our relationship to sex has so much to do with bodies. And we only experience the world at the level of our nervous system, right? Everything that you feel, right, is a nervous system response. It's a full body response. We are constantly reacting to our internal and external environment. And as part of that, we actually need to be in places that feel relatively safe. So when I talk with folks about like low desire, so Atoya, you were talking about like, you know, postpartum and being like, what is it? Like, where is desire? Right? Desire is embodied wanting. So we need to be in our bodies and connect to what we want. And guess what? Sometimes we do not want somebody rubbing and sucking and pulling on your body. Like you have, right? You've got hands and eyes and bodies on you all day. And sometimes that's not what you're into. Even if you want,
I'm not prioritizing that right now.
Right. Even if you want sexual pleasure, even if you want closeness, even if you want emotional intimacy, even if you want physical contact, the more that we can be honest in general with like what we actually want, it makes so much more opportunity for pleasure. But because we are taught to deny and divorce ourselves from what we want, and we are constantly looking towards external metrics of how we are supposed to be, our self-worth exists in, right, starts to diminish in the gaps. Right? Like if I'm supposed to be something, if I'm supposed to want something, you know, if you know, have a partner that you're into, that you want to be a good partner to, and the standard is, well, you're supposed to have sex X number of times a week, but you recognize like I feel bloated and uncomfortable, or I'm not in a good relationship to my body because also I'm looking at all of these messages around what my body is supposed to look like, and I don't feel good, and I have these expectations of how I'm supposed to feel. Like, where is there room for our self-worth to blossom? Where are we expected to feel assured in our value when our internal dialogue and the messages that we're being reinforced with all the time is about us not measuring up?
Do you think that when women are in tune with those types of emotions, right, and they are able to articulate like, yo, I don't feel great about myself, and these, you know, these are the reasons why, have you been experiencing men are actually receptive to that and like understand and like have the empathy to receive that type of, I guess, moment with their spouses?
Yeah, the majority of the men that I see want their partners to feel good. And it hurts them and pains them to see the difference between how they see their spouses and how their spouses see themselves, right? But many of them don't respond well because they panic with how to show up for that. Again, and that's where emotional intelligence comes in. So when someone is telling you about grief or shame, right? Grief from just the disappointment in where you're at or how you feel. Sometimes there's like loss because our bodies change and they're different, right? And we don't know necessarily how to show up for someone else's grieving. So we're awkward about it, or we're cool with it, 1 or 2 times, but when it's been 6 months, right?
Yeah, they're like, get over it already, right?
Right, because we
how long I got to deal with this?
Right, because our tolerance level for deep feeling is so low, because most of us don't get to live in a space where we can just be in our deep feelings. And grief is a perfect example of this. How long can you be down on grief? Let's say someone in your life passes away, someone in your life dies, which inevitably is going to happen. Someone that you love dies. How long are you allowed to be down for? Right, and notice that. Right. Notice that there is a ceiling. Even if I wouldn't give the same number as you would give based on my context versus yours, you do have a sense that there is at some point in which I'm supposed to be fine again. But that's not how feelings work. That's not how feelings work, right? That grief is proportional to the amount that we value the thing that we've lost. And so if this person or this relationship was really important to me, I'm going to hold that. And so when our bodies change or when whatever is going on, whatever feeling that we have, if there is not a space for us to create for that in ourselves and in the context of our relationship, it's going to be really hard for us to negotiate how we still find sexual connection to each other if I have nowhere to put this that doesn't feel like I have to put it in a box and not connect with this aspect of self that is alive for me in order to be with you. And that's the way in which people often feel like they have to choose between their own selves and their own growth and their own needs versus what they think or know their partner wants.
Do you think that there's people that get stuck in how they feel and they don't know how to get out of it? Like, have you know what I mean? As far as like when you're working with, there's certain people that they might see themselves a certain way, or they might feel something or some trauma's happened and they don't have a way, they don't know how to move past that.
That's the thing that everyone is terrified about. And so I am really thankful that you named that. Most people are avoidant of the experience of their most pressing and significant emotional feelings because they're so scared that if I touch it, it's going to consume me and I won't be able to function. And so the piece of that is real is that you might be aware that you do not have the skill. Right? But skillfulness is developed over time, right? And you don't actually need to have the answers. Guess what? Some of us paid some people a lot of money to go to a lot of school for this, right? So if you don't know what to do with your finances, guess what? You get an accountant. If you don't know what to do with your workouts, you get a trainer. But there's still this big gap between like, if I don't know how to navigate my feelings, I'm going to just swallow them and put them in a box and hope nobody ever touches them. And if something blows up, that shit was not my fault because you were not supposed to make me feel things.
Yeah. So I'm glad that Atoya brought up trauma. So it's interesting when my husband and I were talking about one of our friends in college experienced a level of sexual trauma. And he was saying, like, when I go through all my homegirls, like, almost all of them have experienced a level of sexual trauma. And so I think about how that is brought into a relationship and how not dealing with that can lead to the demise of a relationship. How do you coach couples through such a sensitive situation or topic like sexual trauma?
Yeah. So trauma is an overwhelming experience that we were unprepared for. And so the shift is making our sex life be something far away from that. And that doesn't mean that you're not going to be triggered or activated. Our bodies are wired to protect us. So that level of like vigilance, or when we talk about being triggered, it's a body memory. It's your body reminding you that, oh, hey, is this safe? Because we've been in a situation like this that didn't go well. And so we learn to normalize the experience of being triggered or activated, right? Being fearful or unsure or shutting down. We work on tools to self-soothe and reconnect to your body, to remind your body that like we are in the present. And yes, we have survived maybe some really horrible, gnarly things, right? And I am safe in the present. We invite our partners to participate in that process, right? Of checking in and soothing and safety keeping. And then we both have to be really, 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 really good at honoring our boundaries. Because also what happens is when partners are aware that their partners have had trauma, they also tend to overcompensate and start ignoring their own boundaries, right? We very quickly fall into some of these like codependent, like patterns with each other of like over functioning. And so you don't have to do more than you actually feel good and comfortable with. I mean, comfortable is iffy because every new thing is uncomfortable, right? But that, right? People are like, oh, I'm not comfortable with that. It's like, well, you weren't comfortable with walking when you started.
Right?
You looked
It's
real weird
okay
doing
to be
it.
a little uncomfortable.
Right? Like you weren't very good at it when you started, okay?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
you know, and we build and we grow, but we have such self-consciousness about not immediately being good at something, especially when, you know, there's an audience, and especially when this is important. Like I want my partner to be well, but we allow our partners to invite us in. And we both get really, really good at not just saying no, but about how and when we say yes. Because there are folks who deny their boundaries by just like, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to try that. That's scary. That's no. But what I see a lot, especially in Black women, is being very quick to say yes, right? Without thinking about it, without checking in, without knowing that you can negotiate the terms, without the room for nuance, like yes to this part, but maybe not yes to that part, or tell me more about what you mean by this. Like, right, for a lot of Black women in particular around experiences of trauma, right, you just become hyper accommodating.
You see that a lot in relationships too with these.
Absolutely.
And I'm speaking from the lens of like professional athletes and stuff, but you see it with other men too, or men within other industries as well. But just like this, I'm going to say this, and this is not going to be, but this desperation almost
okay.
to be accommodating, you know, and like you're okay with a pass or whatever when genuinely you're not, but you will say yes because this high profile man, like you want to live up to all of his desires, you know.
Yeah. And in those contexts, what's happening at the level of our psyche and our nervous system is that it is less traumatic for me to experience pain that when I didn't have to fight. Right? Like if you think about the resistance and the injury that comes in the resistance and still losing, especially if you know that this person is bigger than me, this person is more powerful than me, whether that's like literally like physically, but maybe this is a person who is just more emotionally grounded than me. This is a person who's more socially connected than me. This is a person who has more financial stability than I do. This is a person who has more like spiritual, centering than I do. But there is injury that can come in the resistance, and there is part of us that knows that. And so what we call that is a fawn response. So even if this is not good, this would be better for me if this person likes me, if this person is happy with me, if this person, right? Like if I fight, this could end up being a lot worse.
You know, it's interesting that you say that because I think about a lot of women in those circumstances, and to your point, in the moment, she'll say yay or okay, but then afterwards she'll say, that was not okay. And I didn't like that. And you know what I mean? And they want to talk about it later as not being okay, but in the moment, it was okay. You know what I mean? I hear that a lot with women. And you just have to, like, I think I was talking to you about this, Tia, and I was talking about my daughter. Like, I want her in the moment to be comfortable and more than comfortable with sticking up for herself and saying this is not okay. Because if you're telling someone that something's okay, but you really don't believe it is, but then you go back and later and say that I didn't like what he did, well, he didn't know that, right? And so like I was trying to figure out, like, how do you teach young girls in the moment to say, I don't like that, or that is not okay?
This falls into that gray area of consent too, right? And I'm afraid of that because I have boys, you know? So like you see Atoya has boys, and then she also has a young girl. Like, how do we navigate, yes, being able to stand up for yourself and like empowering our daughters, and also establishing like the rule of thumb, or I won't even say rule of thumb, because just being a good human being, but that gray area with our boys.
Yeah. And especially in naming boys in this conversation, some of the most difficult trauma work that I have done has actually been with men, because there's actually so few spaces for men to even acknowledge or recognize their traumatic experiences. So they might just casually talk about a thing, and I'm sitting with them and I said, would you say that was traumatic? And they're like, nah. And I'm like, okay, how would you describe trauma? And they essentially describe their relationship to that experience. And then I say, well, that sounds like what you just said. And there is often this aha or awakening moment, because consent is for women, and right, like, is the brand, that's not fact, right? But consent is for women, and we have to, and yes, we live in a patriarchal society, and women are more likely to be victimized, not likely, by the facts, right? We are victimized more sexually than men are. And this is an everyone issue, right? That we actually have to equip everyone to do this, because it is horrifying and certainly underreported how often women are crossing men's sexual and emotional boundaries, right? All this stuff around like, well, when was the last time? You're not man enough. Are you gay? Blah, 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 right? Like all of these ways in which women can also be perpetrators, all of these men who had first experiences with women who are 10 and 15 years older than them, but are not, but right. But like we don't consider that. We don't consider that the same way as a 13-year-old or a 14-year-old girl having an experience with a man who's 15 years older than her. We can see that really clearly. But, you know, so there is a lot for us to unpack here. But to your question of how do we have these conversations, particularly with young people around consent, there's an acronym that I really like as like a starting place. I love food. Again, my people are Caribbean. This comes from the work of Planned Parenthood. My Caribbean family would not be supportive of the food that it is, but it's fries. I like me a French fry. So that's the acronym, fries. Everybody likes fries.
Everybody, especially late night.
Everybody, see, there you go. Yes. And so some of these are late night conversations, but this applies across the board. So the F is for freely given. So consent has to be freely given. So if I had to convince you, if I had to prove to you, if I, all of this, like just keep asking until they agree, just keep bringing it up, that's squashed. We're not doing that. That's mold on the French fries, okay? So it has to be freely given. Okay, the R is for reversible. So to what you were naming earlier, Atoya, like I can come back and change my mind. Right? I can't rescind consent from before. That has already happened. But if I learn something new along the way, I can bring that to you and say, you know what, this is what we had done last time, but moving forward, or where I am at now, I actually don't like that, because there's so much that we're not going to know until we're in it. And so I can start this, we can be in the middle of this, and consent is in the present. So from here forward, right? So just because I change my consent now, again, doesn't mean that like when we started, we're having a problem. There's activity outside.
Oh, okay. I was checking to see if it was my house. I'm like, is that me beeping? Okay, no, you're good. Sorry.
No, Philadelphia is just smaller New York. So the R, it is reversible. So I'm not pulling it out from under you, but from here forward, right? Then I I is for informed. So how much information can we have about what we are going to do before we do it? Because there are lots of things that we did and you don't have to tell on yourself, but you have at least 2 good stories of something that you tried that you're like, I wish I knew that.
Word.
Didn't know that was gonna happen. Didn't know that wasn't supposed to happen. Didn't know I needed some of this. Didn't know. Right?
Yes.
We wish we had more information because that would have shifted what we brought with us, how prepared we were, who we were gonna call, who we were gonna do this with, whether or not I would still say yes or whether or not I was gonna say no. Because there have also been experiences where like you learn some more about this and you're like, maybe I should have. Right? Maybe that would have been cute, So informed. And it doesn't mean that you spend your whole time researching everything because you're not going to know everything. But like, if you're like, I have no idea what that is, I have no idea what you're talking about, you want to put this in the where, that would be a great time to get more information. And not just from this person. Allow yourself to do whatever research, right? Or have the conversations that you need. So we've done F, we've done R, we've done I. The E is for enthusiastic. And that doesn't mean you need to be like, right, like on the top of the hill screaming like, I want it yesterday. Right? But like, you have to be solid. You have to be clear that your yes is a yes. And so there can be room for you to say maybe or like yes to just this part. But if there is nothing that you can say solidly, like I want blank, period, right, then maybe we need to sit with this a little bit longer, right? And again, room for exploration. But even if you can only say like, I want to explore, right? Like if you're not even there, right, then this is not a good time to say yes, right? We're in grayer consent territory than we might want or need to be. And you can be saying yes to any part of this. And you don't need to tell your partner the details of why you're saying yes. Maybe the only reason you want to have sex tonight is because you know he's going to sleep really well and you don't want him tossing and turning all night because that's going to mess up your sleep, right? Like, doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. If that's the only thing you want sex for and you are solid, like, yes, I want this because, good. Right? People are checking that you have the approved version of why you should do this. Like, oh, you weren't craving my body all day. Like, no.
But we can get this done. Let's go.
Right. So like if you're solid in like, yes, I want to do this, good enough for whatever reason you want to do it. Right. And if you feel conflict about that, then there's room to unpack. Right. And then the S is specific. Okay, so it is specific to the situation. So just because we did that last time, don't mean you can roll up in here and be just expecting some stuff. Just because I said yes to holding your hand at the grocery store doesn't mean I want to hold your hand on my street, doesn't mean I want to hold your hand at school, doesn't mean I want to hold your hand in your room, right? Like, we actually have to continue to have these conversations, and it doesn't have to be this like long drawn out thing. It can really be as simple as like, I want to blank. Right, or hey,
Yeah.
Or hey, do you want to blank? Or it sounds good to me right now. Or what I want to do next week.
Okay, okay,
right, but like, people have this idea that consent is like this like big serious heavy conversation, and I mean it can be, but it can also be as simple as talking about what you both want and designing an experience that feels good to both of you. And so that's not just sex. Atoya, when we last spoke, I'd given the example of going to a restaurant. Right? And so, like, if you can both figure out how to, like, go get a meal and figure out what time and, like, not feel bound to, like, oh, I have to get the steak because you're getting the steak, or, like, I have to share plates because you want to put your fork over here across on my side of the table, or, like, yeah, like, I shared my ravioli with you last time, but, sir, you better get your spoon out my face. Right? Like,
not today.
Right? Like,
Listen.
not today. These are short rib ravioli. You can't just be.
Right? A complete side note. Okay, so generally speaking, I'm okay sharing my food. Like, it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
You can reach over and grab a fry as long as your hands are clean, whatever. Like, I'm completely fine. But I sent my husband to Starbucks to like get me a refresher. This is just this past weekend. And he came back and half of it was gone. And I was so pissed. I'm like, you can just have it. And when I say that led to the longest, because we were in Portland driving back, that led to the longest argument, because he was like, I mean, I always take your food. I'm like, but today I didn't want you taking my stuff. That is hilarious.
See, and so we know, and food, I like to use food
this
as an
works
example.
for Starbucks, ladies and gentlemen.
It sure does. It really does work for your fancy beverage order. It really does. And I like to talk about food because we get passionate about it, and it's a real world example of the ways in which we are still figuring this out in real time, right? And so now we know moving forward, like, I don't like that. And that's a beautiful space around consent for us to be talking about, even if the partner didn't know. Like, and that happens so much in sex. I didn't know. I didn't realize that this was different for you than that. Because to me, it's all the same. A beverage is a beverage is a beverage. And you're like, okay, well, this was an $8 beverage that I was waiting 4 hours for.
You should have got me the venti so I could at least have the rest, the grande on down, okay?
Or got yourself one.
Right?
No, I'm just
Right. And so, but really, and like, notice even there that you are able to put parameters on your yes. So you can reach in my plate if your hands are clean, right? How often do we empower young people to know that that's okay, so that when we are in our big grown ages, that that's not a new skill that we are practicing, that I can say yes to just part of this. Like, yeah, I want to roll around with you, and I want you to touch me over my clothes, right? Like, I don't want to take my bottoms off, right? Like, whatever the case may be, or like, I'm cool with this today, but that doesn't mean this is what's going to happen every time, right? Like, whatever that negotiation is, I want to kiss you without tongue. Right? Like, do we get to say just some yes?
Yes. These are great teachable moments for our kids, boys and girls, right? They both need to understand those things. And these are conversations that we didn't have. So we're doing our kids a disservice, y'all. If y'all ain't changing it and teaching y'all kids these lessons, these are gems that Shadeen is dropping, okay?
and without judgment, because we will need to learn how to do this also. I think we give the best of what we have got to our kids. And so that for me, there is no shame in us noticing like, oh no, I never told my kids that. I never taught them that. And it's probably because nobody taught you that and you didn't know that, or you're just learning that. And so one of the beautiful things about parenthood is that it invites us to another level of growth, because we see the gaps that existed in our own lives, and we do feel committed to offering our kids something that we didn't have, the best of what we didn't have, so that they might not struggle in the same ways we struggled. They're going to have their own struggles, right? We won't be able to keep them from that. But at the very least, we want them to not have to navigate the hardships that we did without tools. But what that means for us is that we're usually building the tools as we teach them, right? We are usually just one page ahead of them in the book. And I know a lot of parents have fear and shame around that. And
but that's okay. Yeah.
It is.
Yep.
They always say, you always got to hug and kiss your firstborn. Tell them, I'm sorry, honey. I was just figuring it out with you, but I love you.
Figuring it out. And in that, you know, I want to also invite us, there has been a larger cultural shift. You know, we are really entering the first time in which we are not reliant on our elders for information in the ways that we have been in the past. Millennials were kind of the first generation who sought their own right and had more sources of information at their fingertips without having to go through some of these hierarchical channels. And so while there's been a lot of benefit to that, it has also meant that people have kind of been on their own trying to learn things. But one of the most beautiful things for me, being solidly a millennial myself, right? The oldest millennials I think are 41 this year. So before anyone thinks that they know how old I am, you don't. Everyone's like, oh, you're a baby. And I'm like, well, yes, but also I'm grown. But one of I have to remind people that, because I am technically young in chronological years and I have a young face. And so when people read my bio and they see me, they're like, oh, I'm like, yeah.
But yeah,
I got it. Honey, what you been through,
Listen.
Girl? You ain't been through nothing.
Right. And I say, you know what? Like, I don't have to be a chicken to know how to scramble some eggs. So
let them know.
Right. And so one of the things that I think is also really beautiful in the shift, while there are hardships in that shift, of us sort of decentralizing information, is that I have felt so thankful and blessed to be able to pass information back up the chain. Right? That like when we think of legacy, we always think of ourselves forward. And I would love for us to invite like a sense of legacy, like what also can I pass back? Right? So like generations before me didn't have the opportunities that I had to like sit in a space like this and talk to, accomplished, smart women about like how we're thinking and feeling about sex in a public forum, and for us to talk about like shame or fears or embarrassment, or for me to have done the emotional work that I have done. And so I see it as necessary to my vision of legacy to be passing some of this information back to aunties, and I no longer have living grandparents, but aunties and parents and elders, and again Caribbean, so auntie is a very broad territory, right? Like uncles, and being able to pass this education and information back, because I don't know if we'd be doing ourselves and any favors by hoarding this information, because our moms and grandmothers didn't have this. And there's so many times when I'm working with women in their 50s and 60s who are just coming to the information, Tia, that you said that you got in college around like, oh, I'm also supposed to orgasm, right? Or like, whether or not like my pussy is wet right now is actually not a very good indicator of whether I am interested or ready for sex, right? Like all of this information that like nobody had, right? Like people are just discovering that like, oh, the clitoris is the only organ that's designed purely for pleasure. It has no other function other than to make you feel good, right? Like we're just learning these different things about our literal bodies that we've walked around with for centuries. Right. And so we pass this back up.
You got to pass this back up and down to the women out there, because we got this question. They want to know what 3 things they can do to spice up their sex life. What 3 things do you recommend that women should do to spice it up?
Yeah, those questions are always tricky
pressure
for me, because it's not no pressure, right? Because sex is not one size fit all. So this is going to be kind of higher level, and folks usually want to like put a donut on his penis and blah blah blah, and twerk on his
nah.
right? I'm not.
Wow,
right?
those
like,
are
people
fun.
want,
Not
like,
that. No.
right? Like people usually want like a new tip that they've never tried before that's gonna like change the whole context of their lives. The first thing that I want to invite people into is outside of sex. I want you to sit down and I want you to make a list of, in the present moment, what do I want? No judgment, no expectations, no checking whether or not it is reasonable, feasible, possible, right? What do you want? Right. The next thing that I want, folks, if you want to spice up your sex life, I want you in a quiet moment you don't have to look them in the eye, but I want you to get close to your partner, and I want you to tell them something you want. Now, you're welcome to make that sexual, right? But it could be, I really want a glass of water, but I want you to say it like you mean it. And you don't have to put on a sexy voice, but you will hear the timbre change when you allow yourself to be present to desire, right? And then I want you to ask your partner about something that they want. And I want you to wait until they tell you. And if they don't have something in the moment, you're going to come back to it. Don't come back in like 5 minutes if they're not ready, if they need more time to process. But I want you to let them know that what they want matters to you. And notice the order of operations. You started with what you want. So don't be skipping ahead to number 3. I'm giving you these in order.
Chronological order, people.
Right. Right. You're going to start with just reflecting and making a practice. And if that is hard, keep doing it until it feels less hard. Right. Because again, skillfulness is developed. So if it's awkward, it's not that you're bad at it because you just can't do it. It's unfamiliar. And that's information that you probably don't ask yourself that question very often. And you probably haven't had permission to. And so I want you to make a habit of that. Then I want you to take one thing and tell your partner that you want it. And then I want you to ask your partner what they want. So you haven't acted on anything necessarily in a sexual way.
So are we using our regular voice or are we using like the Shadeen voice? I'm just trying to make sure I'm doing this because your voice is like, listen, this is what I want y'all to do. Like, do they need to know this is my sexual spicy voice? Like, do I need a name? What are we doing here?
You know what? I invite you to pick whatever works for you, right? If there is someone who, right, like I definitely have my own mood. I have my own vibe.
Like if someone called you like on the sex line, they'd be like, "Oh yeah, can I speak to Shadeen again? Because I like that voice."
LOL. That's actually an award that I had gotten in college.
Did you really?
Best set. I've never been a phone sex operator, but that it was like most likely to have like an award-winning like sex hotline or whatever. I don't remember the exact wording, but yes. So I will claim that gladly. But like, you know, if performance feels fun for you, do that. I love a good performance. I know everyone's like, oh, be authentic, be real. I'm a Gemini. So I'm also like, you know what? If being someone else is fun for me for the moment, like I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that too.
Find me a costume.
Right. You know, as you can see, my hair is red today. You know, I am not a natural redhead. So if performance is fun for you and allows you to the thing that is fun for me about performance as a former theater kid is it allows me to experience things that might have been inaccessible in the context of my day-to-day life. Right? Like if my usual life is like this, and I know myself really well, and I'm this way, and I'm this way, and this way. But like, if it would feel freeing or fun or expansive for me to try something else, you know what? Like today, I'm a Southern belle, you know, and right, and you find my husband hates that one because I'm like you brute, what kind of woman do you think I am? You know, Salome would not approve, you know. And so, you know, but you find whatever feels like freeing or fun to you. And so if finding a sultry voice and saying, hey, I want you to put your hand right here, right? If that feels good to you, cool, right? But if you just want to keep your normal voice, if maintaining eye contact is a lot, right? But I just want us to start making a practice of naming what we want in real time because our partners tend to, one, hear that as an invitation, two, get to use that information to know us more deeply, but three, normalizes that we are going to have desire throughout the context of our day. And so we're not holding desire as this like special, like break glass in case of sexual emergency, you know, type of moment where like I only feel wanting, you know, in this very particular context. And that particular context for most of us doesn't happen very often, right? It's not very often for most of us where your partner comes in through the door and you happen to be standing there in the hallway with nothing else to do but kind of gracefully on your way somewhere, and they make eye contact with you and they drop their bag and they start unbuttoning their shirt, right? Like you're not, right? Like that's not, I mean, if it is, kudos to you, right? Like, hope you stretched this afternoon, but right, but it doesn't have to be that, and it won't.
She said, I hope you have stretched this afternoon.
I have a girlfriend that says that she's like, we plan our sex days or sex. I'm like, really? I'm like, what do you mean? She's like we know what day. She's like, because she's like, to be honest, she's like, I would not have sex as often if I went by my day to day. My day to day is hell. She's like, so we plan. And she's like, and sometimes it's not our sex, like our date nights. Like sometimes sex nights are different than date nights. But she's like, we have to plan them and we both know and we both, you know what I mean? She's like, that's just how it works for us. And I'm like, kudos to you. I never even thought of that.
Yeah, we have this wild idea that the only passionate sex is spontaneous. Right, but that's the story that we keep getting told. And again, that's that emergency break glass, like passion has to be like this thing that you weren't expecting. But we have multiple layers and kinds of desire, but two ways that we can talk about desire. There is spontaneous desire. So anticipation as the motivation.
That's what I was thinking, yeah.
And you get that from planning.
Yes. Like, I know it's coming on Wednesday.
Right.
I'm going to have to try it because in my head, I'm like, if it's planned, then I'm going to be like, well, you didn't necessarily want to do it. Then we just got it on the calendar.
See, but if we make a practice of only saying yes when we mean yes, I don't have to worry about that. I don't have to worry that you're only showing up here because you said you were going to show up here, because I trust that if you weren't into it, we wouldn't be doing it. And also knowing that it's coming, if I woke up in the morning and I was like, right, that like I also have some time to get my head right or to get myself in a sexual space if I say I want to honor that agreement. Right? So I can also get myself ready for sex that I know that is coming. But quite often, folks try and spontaneous sex someone who isn't there. And so if I'm in the middle of washing my dishes, or if I just had a very stressful day, and then you strip butt naked and are like, hey, let's party, I'm like, what are you doing?
Right.
That's not where I'm at.
I'm trying to get to that bed. I'm trying to get to that bed.
Right. Yeah. But if I knew that that's what type time we were trying to be on,
maybe
I might be washing these dishes in some heels or something, right? Like getting myself in that space. But it has to be a mutual yes. So we have spontaneous desire that comes from the anticipation and motivation, or expectation as motivation. And then we have responsive desire. And responsive desire is when the pleasure itself creates more desire. So we're doing it and it feels good, and so I want it. But that means that you actually have to be in a place to receive in terms of responsive desire. And we forget how few windows there are like that built into our days, especially as Black women, because we keep getting relegated as superwomen. And superwomen are not available for their own pleasure because they are constantly on call. And so you're not actually in a place to receive, and sex, as we're trying to reframe, is not just for our partner's pleasure. So it's not just because you want it. I have to want it. But half the time, I don't even know what I want because I've been doing for 30 other people. And so by the time you come to me, I'm going to say no because I am so far away from wanting. And so it doesn't even necessarily mean that I couldn't want this, but I haven't even had the space to think about what I want. So it's a no by default.
We could do a whole episode on that.
Yeah, I was going to say, listen, we need to do a part 2 because Shadeen's breaking it all down. Because we've all been there. Like, there's just different waves of life that we're in. When the kids are young, it's like, ugh. Like, and then they get a little older. You're like, okay, I'm free now. Like, let's go. And then, you just go in these different ups and downs and peaks and valleys. And so just knowing these different ways to switch it up, to change things, it's important for us. So maybe we need to do like a ladies, just a whole sex show on, different things to really spice up the bedroom. I think that would be really fun. I mean, outside of this, like maybe we can come with some, you can pull some stuff out the bag. I don't know. We'll figure it out. But
I had to convert my pantry. It's a walk-in pantry, and it is now a shoe/sex stuff room.
No, it's not.
Like I promise you it is. I have like this 6 set of IKEA like big dresser drawers, just like full of stuff, and then the rest of it is shoes. Because I'm like, how many cans does a girl need?
She was like, I'm not even here to enjoy this food. Let me store this properly.
Yeah, no, I've got drawers and drawers of toys, but I'm like, who needs canned beans? So
hilarious.
This will get me over right here. This toy right here will get me through.
some leather, just all the things a girl really
needs. Right in the kitchen, ready for you. Shadeen, tell everyone where they can find you and to continue this conversation.
Yeah, so I, of course, have a website. It's my name, ShadeenFrancis.com. If you want little sneak peeks of like events or things that are happening kind of in real time, you can follow me on Instagram, and that's at Shadeen Francis. I'm also on a platform called Mind. There might be a name change coming soon, so if that does happen before this episode launches, you'll still be able to link to that from my website or my Instagram. But I'm there twice a week live, and we hold sessions on all of this stuff. So if you have questions, if you have things that you want to talk about, you can find me there every Tuesday and Thursday at 2:30. It's an app that you download onto your phone, and it's private. We have a lovely community of folks. Right now, we're talking about anger, and so...
This is 2:30 Eastern, right?
2:30 Eastern, I'm live, but it's all recorded on the app. So any of the content that you can go back and we've been at it for a little while. It's not just me on there. There's so much beautiful, juicy content. So if you're in a place where you want to be having more conversations or just want to dive deeper into how you expand your mind or your heart, that platform is doyoumind.com.
I will be sure to put links to all of that in our show notes.
Thank you so much, Shadeen. You were amazing. We got to do a part 2 for sure.
Yeah, this is so fun. Thank you for having me.
Shadeen was fantastic. I could have literally sat and talked to her for another hour.
Oh, of course. Hey, but you know what? It's like, it's so many gems, because to her point, I was one of the ones I'm like, oh, she about to be talking about flipping and dipping and everything else. But, sex is so much more than that. And then so it's very important that you are in tune with yourself and that your spouse also have emotional intelligence too. So yeah, she definitely gave me some things to work on and to talk about, and I can't wait to have her back on.
And just remembering, delivery is key, ladies. Say what you mean from a tender spot.
Get to the other side of that anger, okay?
All right, that's the show. For the latest on the Inside Lines podcast, make sure to follow us at Inside Lines Podcast on both Instagram and Facebook.
And you can also find us at insidelinespodcast.com, where you can listen online and share your favorite episode. And lastly, if you have any questions, comments, feedback, asking for a friend questions, make sure you leave us a voicemail at speakpipe.com/insidelines.
Until then, leave it all out on the field. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.